Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldest be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Senators in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General.
I have a message from the Acting Governor General, and it reads as follows. Dated 19 February 2021. Dear Mr. President, I have the honor to inform the Honourable the Senate that the Governor General, Her Excellency Dame Sandra Mason, GCMG DAQC, has been granted vacation leave for the period 6 to 22nd February 2021. In accordance with the provisions of Section 29(1)(a) of the Constitution, I have taken the necessary oath to perform the functions of the Office of Governor General during Her Excellency's absence. As the Honourable the Senate is not meeting at this time, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring the absence of Her Excellency formally to the attention of the Honourable Senate when next it meets? I have the honour to be yours faithfully, Acting Governor General, Dr. the Reverend Honourable Jeffrey Gibson.
Announcements by Your Honour.
Honourable Senators, in relation to announcement, just to alert you, the matter of facilitating participation by Honourable Senators in our meetings via video conferencing platforms, that is a matter that will require some formal action by this chamber. You'll recall that Her Excellency the Governor General has signed the necessary proclamation permitting such to happen. However, we have not met since December 18th, and in order to trigger the formal process of the Standing Orders Committee, making necessary amendments to the standing orders to facilitate such, we need to formally move a resolution of the Senate. The Standing Orders Committee is only empowered to consider matters which have been referred to by the Senate, and we therefore could not refer the matter whilst we were not meeting since mid-December. Accordingly, during the course of today's sitting, notice of the appropriate notice, the appropriate language will be presented to the Senate for Senate's approval, and this will be approval to send the matter for consideration by the Standing Orders Committee, which committee will then come up with the appropriate structures and so on. And I must tell you that that heavy lifting having been done by the Honourable House of Assembly and the Office of the Clerk of Parliament, we will be adopting similar appropriate procedures, policies, technology, and the like, such that as soon as that is approved by the Standing Orders Committee, we will be, they will submit a report, which according to the Standing Orders has to be approved by the Honourable Senate, which will allow us to legally and properly meet via that medium. Just to remind that the quorum, based on the certain practice in the House, there's still the need for the minimum quorum to be present in the facility, and the others can join by video conference, which then allows for greater distancing and so on. Additionally, in relation to our meetings, we had received guidance from the Chief Medical Officer a few months ago in terms of the physical spacing and procedures, and we did update that guidance, or we did seek updated guidance during the course of last week or early this week, and the arrangements which you have in place today as a result of the guidance, which remains remains pretty much the same. There's a requirement, just to remind, that if you're going to be speaking, that you'll need to wear your mask if you're going to be speaking within less than 6 feet from your next closest person. And so those, given the room we have, you can always shift to another location where you will be so distant. I have requested the clerk to additionally have installed a standalone microphone to facilitate that. But in the meantime, you can just find a place which is distant, and if you need to remove your mask, you can speak from that location. So we did have advice concerning the arrangements and so on. So those are announcements. So I expect that during the course of this sitting, you will have the appropriate motion that would allow the Standing Orders Committee to formally consider the arrangements similar to what have been put in place by the House, so we can get a report back with urgency to the Honourable Senate. Once that is approved, then we can do it. Because remember, the principle behind these formal structures is that no one, not the President, not a leader of government business, not a group of, not a cabal of senators, not the clerks, can change the orders of this chamber without the chamber's knowledge and permission. You know, so even, for example, on a given sitting day, and we want to suspend a particular standing order, there's always a question put for approval, because the House regulates its own procedures. So it is based on that principle, but all the technical work and all the other matters have been concluded to ensure that we are able to use that facility. So that is it for announcements from the chair. Sorry, excuses. First of all, I have been informed that Senator Dr. John Rogers will be late. In terms of absence, the Honourable Leader of the House, Leader of Government Business, is going to be absent today. He is participating in a Heads of Government meeting, as all Ministers of Foreign Affairs will do from time to time. Additional absence, notice of absence from Senator Monique Tate, Senator Caswell Franklin, Senator Crystal Drakes, and Senator Lucille Moore. I have before me for consideration minutes of our meetings on December 9th and 18th for confirmation. Senator Mahoney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of Wednesday, December 9th, 2020, and of Friday, December 18th, 2020 be confirmed.
The question is that the minutes of our meetings of December 9th and December 18th be confirmed. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The minutes stand so confirmed.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following two documents: the Post Office Delivery Amendment Regulations 2021 and the Post Office Miscellaneous Services Amendment Regulations 2021.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 22.1 and 45.2 in order that this Honourable Chamber may conclude the consideration of all bills on today's order paper.
The question is that Standing Orders 22.1 and 45.2 be suspended for the remainder of the sitting. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of these three bills: the Barbados Identity Management Bill 2021, the National Payment Systems Bill 2021, and the Bills of Exchange Amendment Bill 2021. And I move that they be read first time.
The question is that the bills so cited be read the first time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Public business.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 2, sir. Naming the Honourable Leader of the Senate and assigned to Senator Cummins to move the second reading of the National Payment Systems Bill 2021.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move.
That's order number 5, sir, on the supplementary order paper.
Order number 5. Order number 5.
That items 2 and 3 be treated as a cognate debate. 5 and 6, sorry.
The question is that orders number 5 and 6. What are the names again? National Identity and National Payments and Exchange of Bills.
And Bill of Exchange.
Bills of Exchange. The question is that items 5 and 6 be treated as one debate. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummins, please proceed.
Mr. President, I rise on this occasion to present these two bills at an interesting time. Mr. President, I was discussing it with one of my colleagues this morning in casual conversation, and they made a reference to how frequently in today's space we use technology platforms like WhatsApp. We communicate in individual form. We started out with BlackBerry Messenger. We then started to use WhatsApp. We started to use WhatsApp for messaging. We started then to use it for calling. And very few of us now incur overseas charges on our various landlines as a result of the technology and the disruptive technology that is WhatsApp as a platform. We initially had MSN Messenger. We evolved into Skype. We use Zoom. Mr. President, technology has been disruptive and it has created mechanisms by which we have changed the way in which we do business. The bills before us today, Mr. President, are a reflection of that time, change, and space within which we now operate, and so too must our financial payment system. The National Payments Bill in particular, Mr. President, is a particularly significant and transformational body of legislation. It's divided into 13 parts. It has a schedule which is appended to it. It establishes a council, and it is purported to establish in Barbados systems which already exist in other jurisdictions, including Hong Kong, Kenya, and other large jurisdictions with whom we have been made familiar when it was presented in the other place. Mr. President, it speaks about things that sound very fancy, very esoteric, very far-reaching, and it does, in many instances, seem out of the reach of many people who are not financial services experts. So I want to spend a moment this morning, and it's the reason why I started where I started, by making reference to the basic ways in which our use of technology systems, processes, and how we transact business today is not what it used to be yesterday. I want to spend a moment today, Mr. President, to make it very clear that the things that sound esoteric, technical, and based on the work of experts that are so far removed, Mr. President, is actually very simple and is already a part of our daily lives. Now, in broad practical terms, a national payment system allows for the interaction between payment service providers and participants in the system. It allows for seamless financial regulations to be put in place that allow banks and credit unions who have typically dominated the local financial space to allow that to now be expanded. It treats to the interests of consumers as well as service providers. It allows us to trade in goods and services. It allows us to function nationally. It allows us to be export-oriented because it moves across borders. It allows us to be integrated into a national payment system that, in summary, is global in its scope. But it also, despite that vast reach of a structural transformation, that is what these two bills represent now. It is also an inclusive measure that allows for the opening up and the entry into force of new innovations by which people can conduct and transact business. And I want to spend a moment on that, Mr. President. Now, this morning and into last night, as I was preparing for this presentation, I spent a moment listening to the debate in the other place. And the points which were made by the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance responsible for laying this bill in the other place. And I also heard the responses being made by others that opposed some of the key elements. And it troubled me, Mr. President, because when I was preparing for this, interestingly enough, I chose to spend time looking at what Kenya, in particular, of all of the systems that exist, has done. And I looked at Kenya, one, because it is a developing economy. It is an African economy. It has high levels of unemployment, high levels of entrepreneurship, but it is also, like Barbados and most countries like us, attempting to integrate into a global economic trading system. It has persons who are highly educated, well-trained, well-integrated into financial services, but it also has an expansive and extensive farming class. It has a number of people who all across the country transfer money from rural villages in remote parts of Kenya bordering Somalia and everywhere else into Nairobi, into bustling border towns like Mombasa. I use the Kenyan example, Mr. President, because the notion that anyone in this country in 2021 would be patronizing enough to assume that a coconut vendor on the side of the road is not, in fact, a key cog in the wheel of technological and financial services transformation was actually somewhat offensive to me. It was offensive to me, Mr. President, because the farmers who function in rural areas of Kenya are fully integrated into the M-Pesa network that has allowed them to transfer mobile payments and mobile money since 2007, Mr. President. The persons who live in Nairobi and who are sending money to their elderly mother and father in the villages in eastern Kenya are well entrenched in M-Pesa. So the notion that here in Barbados we would feel that a basic technology platform that allows for financial inclusion of persons at all levels is above that of a coconut vendor is a clear indication of where the lack of vision exists, Mr. President. But I want to go into what the vision actually is in this bill in some detail. I want to spend a few moments talking about what it actually allows us to do. So countries like Canada and Hong Kong, larger economies, and Kenya have already done this before. And they have been able to incorporate a number of domestic realities, yes, cultural, but also structural. And that's what this administration and this bill is hoping to be able to focus on. Now, the first points that I want to make here speak to the question of what is safe, what is efficient, and what is going to be effective in the management of our banking system. One of the pieces of research that I read in preparation for this discussion spoke about the concentration in just 3 large commercial entities in country of over 50, in some instances. One paper at 2017 suggested it could be even as high as 75% of all liquid assets in country. What that says to us is that there has to be a democratization of financial arrangements in this country that allow for both financial service providers, traditional at the level of commercial banks. We have moved now to the incorporation of credit unions and credit union societies. If you recall, when the social partnership was established, the bankers had a seat at the table, and in the last year, you have seen the credit unions equally have a seat at the table, and they are part of the process. And now we're even moving beyond that, where service providers at every level have an opportunity to be integrated and to allow for that natural process of evolution and inclusion to take place. The national payment system also will allow for the less circulation of cash and less dependence on the use of checks in the system. I don't know how many times we have gone rummaging in our bags looking for a checkbook. I can't even remember the last time I ordered checkbooks, simply because that's not real anymore, because even in the way in which we pay for services and goods, that too has evolved. Once upon a time, we ordered checkbooks and they came and we made an order for 100 or 200 or something like that. We don't do that anymore. Most of us now pay bills online. Even our elderly parents are saying, can you set me up online, and linking their pension deposit accounts into the payment of their household bills. That's called the evolution of our financial processes. There are a number of things which are not going to be covered in this bill, and if we were to get into a detailed explanation of it today, you would not see them there, because the bill is meant to be overarching. When I talk about the disruption and the evolution of how technology and financial services have evolved over time, it's because time is the key variable. It is a distinguishing variable, and that which was today may not exist tomorrow, and certainly may be obsolete by next year. And it is on that basis, Mr. President, that the bill is deliberately designed by its architects to allow for a regulatory and administrative framework to be appended to the bill, along with judicial instructions being given that allow for time to take its natural course. And so there are a number of specifics and details which will go into the bill that will allow for it to be put into effect over time. The bill itself is divided into 13 parts, and it has a schedule. I'm going to spend a moment on the actual parts of the bill. The first part, parts 1 through 3, deal with the preliminaries and the powers given to the various terms in the bill, and it also talks about the overriding objectives of the payment system itself. It talks specifically about the role of the Central Bank of Barbados, which is a custodian of the bill, as a guardian of the bill. And it establishes what that central bank's role is going to be under the leadership of what is to be established as a National Payments Council. Now, this council is going to act as an advisory body to the bank, and it is going to provide the regulatory support to the Central Bank of Barbados. This is not something that we have created and reinvented the wheel on. It is modeled very similarly onto the UK Payment Systems Regulator and the various advisory councils that were established in Canada. The second part of this section of the bill speaks to licensing, and it is drawn on a number of entities which are captured under the Financial Institutions Act and the Cooperative Societies Act, and those that are the ones that are going to be providing services. One of the key things that I want to pay attention to here, because I won't go into detail on every element of it, but this is going to be applied to various service providers as applicable depending on the context and subject to where there are appropriate modifications that need to be made. But there are also instances where penalties may have to be levied as a result of persons being out of compliance with what is required based on a review period, and licenses may therefore be suspended, revoked, or subject to a due process revision process. Parts 4 through 6 speak to ongoing oversight and innovation, and I did mention that the bill is deliberately broad-based in its framing to allow for regulations to come in place to allow for ongoing innovation processes to take place. And so you will expect some of this over time. And one of the key elements that I want to focus on here is that it is the preferred option that the payment system participants in the process will agree on and set the standards for interoperability, and that will allow us to add legitimacy to the system. Now, one element that has been discussed a bit is the treatment of information, and my honourable colleague, the Minister with responsibility for science and technology, is no doubt in her own presentation on a related but separate bill going to speak about the management of information as it relates to the collection of persons' personal data. But there are, of course, measures that are put in place where here in this House, we have already passed the Data Protection Bill. That bill is to be proclaimed. There is no Data Protection Act. And we have a mechanism already in place for how we treat to and protect data. But beyond that, I'm sure that we were also very pleased to hear the news during the course of this week about Barbados' removal from the EU blacklist. And so we continue to pay very close attention to the importance of anti-money laundering legislation, to the need for us to avoid financing of terrorist activities. We also, in this place, passed legislation to that effect over the course of the last 3 years, and it is expected that Barbados will continue, under the bank's guidance, to be in compliance with those provisions. The last element of the bill that I want to speak about is consumer protection. This is both providers and consumers that will be captured in this framework. This is a long-standing debate, long-standing conversation which has taken place in the country about consumer protection. It comes up under many guises, whether we're talking about price controls, price gouging, the absence of interest rates, regulation by the central bank. It comes up in many incarnations, and we are going to be looking, in the context of this bill, at the question of consumer protection. Now, originally, there was the intention that there was to be a tribunal created within the confines of this bill. It has now been determined that the Financial Services Tribunal will continue to deal with matters arising now that it already has in place. But in this case, the Payments Act will be governed by the Financial Services Tribunal, and the Fair Credit Reporting, as well as matters that are being dealt with by the Financial Services Commission Tribunal. Mr. President, there are two items I would want to raise as I come to the second part of my presentation. Mr. President, we are in a space where, and I think the Prime Minister describes it well, we have to learn to walk and chew gum chew gum confidently. There are many people who would say, over them and they're dealing with them things now, people up on the road and people suffering and people need this and people need that. Those things are all true. Those things are all important. There is a Ministry of Health, Mr. President, and a Prime Minister's office and a COVID monitoring unit and all of the various arms of government that are on a day-to-day basis, 7 days a week, sometimes 24 hours a day, focusing on the issues of the day, ensuring that we're able to keep businesses afloat, ensuring that we're able to keep Barbadians safe, ensuring that we are capable at the same time of protecting lives and livelihoods. There are people who come to work in this country every single day to do that. That is the walking. They are walking the road every day. But that does not mean that we are not also simultaneously meant to take responsibility for walking and chewing gum. And so the agenda of the government of Barbados must continue simultaneously to dealing with the short-term challenges that are before us, dealing with the planning that is required before us, dealing with the mitigation before us in a real and a meaningful way, but simultaneously planning and continuing to implement the structural transformation agenda that this government came to office giving a commitment to. The people of Barbados will not forgive us if we come to the end of a period of time where we have to face the polls again and we say, well, we didn't do X or we didn't do Y because of COVID, or we didn't do this or we didn't do that because of COVID. There will be those things, Mr. President, for sure, because there are many things that are completely out of our control that we will not have been able to deliver on. But this, Mr. President, is not one of those things. The reform of our financial system, the reform of our financial institutions, the reform of our financial systems architecture, embracing new technologies, embracing innovation in all of our processes, those are not things that we can say we did not do because of COVID. And so this government has not rushed this process. This government has not jumped the gun on this process. This government is walking and chewing gum. This government is serving our short-term objectives of keeping people safe while still maintaining the interests of a country that has to survive in a post-COVID environment. When we come to the end of this period, because to an end of this period we must come at some point, there is no certainty about when that will be. But when that time comes, this administration must be in a position to say, these are the transformational initiatives that even during a difficult, challenging, and painful time, we still were able to bring to the fore. And that is the commitment of this administration. Whether it is in tourism, which I'm not speaking about today, whether it is in small business, whatever area of the segment of our economy and our society where there is a transformation agenda, this government is in a position where we can say without fear of reproach that we have teams that are working on today and we have teams that are working on tomorrow. We have teams that are projecting what we expect to deal with next week, in as much as that is within our control. But we also have teams that simultaneously are saying, this is the Barbados we want to see in 10 years. This is the Barbados we want to see in 5 years. These are the things that we have to bring to the table. And if in 2021, Barbados is now having a discussion that countries like Kenya were having in 2007 over the changes in their financial system and the use of different mechanisms, there can be no rush about that. Instead, and in fact, what we are dealing with is a country that is in many regards playing catch up. And so I am committed, Mr. President, to supporting this bill, and I commend it to my colleagues as part of the architecture of our development trajectory as a nation that we must build. And I wish, with those few words, to beg that these two bills be read a second time.
Payments at this time.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the National Payment Systems Bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I raise in support of this national payments bill. I applaud government on moving in this direction and this step that is being taken. It is, I think, a very important step in terms of assisting or facilitating the overall development of trade in the country, of being able to make sure that our financial systems are working at peak operations, and providing also for government itself a means of reducing the overall cost of its payment systems. You know, government spends a considerable amount of its expenditure, or used to, you know, writing payments of checks and so on. And that becomes very costly. And so therefore, to facilitate systems where various stakeholders will be comfortable to use alternative systems to checks and cash will definitely be a move in the right direction. Only within recent weeks, Mr. President, we have seen the importance of moving towards what I think this app is driving, or will be driving us towards, which is certainly, I don't see that it would be a cashless economy in, you know, the very short term or even medium term, but certainly to encourage less use of cash, less use of paper transactions will definitely be important and definitely be useful in driving down the cost of government operations itself. But I also see, Mr. President, from the point of view of users of these systems, it is important to have this framework. And I say that because when you look, for example, at our banking system, there are lots of persons, for one reason or another, who don't have banking arrangements. I know, for example, that banks now charge a fee on savings accounts, for example, if they drop below a certain minimum, which means it is not useful or it is counterproductive for certain persons to have them little funds in a savings account if you know that you're going to be penalized because it drops below a certain level. But all those people are still, all of those persons are still part of our society. They still have transactions to do. They still have to go about their regular daily business. They still have to pay their bills. They still have to buy food and so on. And therefore, it is important that there are alternative ways which would provide them, as far as possible, to have access to payment systems outside of having to use banking systems. Obviously, there's going to be some persons, the dinosaurs like myself, who will probably have some difficulty grasping initially, moving to this kind of cashless societies and so on. But I assure you that with time, with patience, with people like us, we can become more and more comfortable with using such systems. And so I think I make this point because I want to say that it is important to sensitize all of us, to get all of us to recognize the importance of moving in this direction towards cashless societies. And one of the things which I hope, and I'm sure government will have to do, is to do their education programs, because that is where, again, people like us will begin to appreciate the importance of not having to go and stand up in a line or stand up at a post office, or particularly in these days of COVID and so on. If you can do a lot of your transactions at home, or if you can do a lot of transactions at the point of sale, then you can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of effort, and perhaps even put some of that time into more productive or more desirable things that you wish to do. And I also see, Mr. President, that we need these facilitations because with the level of unemployment currently, our young people seeking to find employment or alternative sources of employment. And mind you, a lot of these young people, being whiz kids and familiar with the technology, are very well going to find ways of developing business interests which are based on electronic systems and so on. But these people will not have a banking history, for example. And so it makes it a little difficult. It will probably make it a little difficult for them if they go to the bank and the bank needs to see, various forms of ID. You need a utility bill, you need this, and you need that. And a lot of them don't have that kind of, lots of them probably don't even have bank accounts. So I see that in developing this national payment system, it will probably facilitate a lot of trade, a lot of development of ideas, small businesses. It can, provided we give the impetus, we give the direction, and we allow our young people to take up the opportunities and move with them. And then I got some ideas from the presentation just now, but overall I didn't get a kind of an overall vision of what government perhaps see we going in terms of this system in the next maybe 5 to 7 years or so. And it would have been useful to see how government see this system such as these. And I should say that, to my mind, this is probably only a work in progress because there are several other things that will need to develop and need to need to come in place as this system becomes more and more acceptable. For example, we have to make sure that regulations and laws and so on keep current and on the cutting edge as the payment systems, as the technology and so on changes, the laws and so on will, of necessity, have to be upgraded and developed in order to be able to regulate these changing systems. I have scanned through the Act, Mr. President, and I think and in my mind, it covers to a lot of the things which I mentioned. It's dealt with things like security, which obviously will be integral to a payment system. As we know, our financial system is really dependent on a key thing, which is trust. And if we don't have adequate, secured systems which people feel comfortable with and which they can rely upon, it's going to be, we're going to fail from the very start. And so I want to encourage government to continue to develop the other areas which need to work, which need to go hand in hand with developing this national payment system. But just as a footnote, Mr. President, I know that this provides an opportunity, obviously, for the providers of services, the payment services, to make revenue. But I would hope that in doing all of this, government seriously, or the regulators, I should say, make sure that the fees which are going to be in charge are fair, that they're reasonable, and that, I mean, you know, Mr. President, we know that from a while now, we have been complaining about the number of fees that are being charged by various financial institutions and so on. So we don't want to see, in other words, as I said earlier, one of the things about this national payment system is that should be cost effective for anyone to use, whether it be, as I said, the government or individual or business and so on. And so I would really like to implore that while I understand the regulators don't like the idea of having too much control or direct control over fees and so on, that implicit in this overall regulation, that they will look at that fees and perhaps publish all the fees or have some site or something where you can compare fees of various providers and so on, and make sensible choices as to who you think may be best to do business with. But, Mr. President, I want to commend government on moving this legislation, perhaps hastened, as I said, because of the pandemic, but I wish them well, and I think that, and I want to say that I hope that it is a truly successful piece of legislation. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Nurse. Senator Wiggins.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to speak on the National Payments Bill. First, let me say I wholeheartedly support this bill in principle. I support it, Mr. President, primarily because when you look now with this pandemic, and when the banks are open, you see the long lines, Mr. President, outside the banks and the credit unions. So the same thing that you're trying to avoid is happening with so many persons coming on the streets. What I would sincerely advise, sir, is that we have a rollout of a national public education campaign in relation to how this national payments bill would affect everyone, and as the senator said, even the coconut vendors. And vendors, generally speaking, in all the markets, because they would say, maybe that's not for me. I believe we are moving to a cashless society because it would, first of all, avoid a lot of armed robberies, both within the home and on the streets and in businesses. So if we can move to a cashless society, Mr. President, I think it will benefit Barbados and Barbadians. The younger people, and I speak to like my children, I wanted my niece to get me something from a supermarket. And I do online payments. I don't have the one that is with their bank. My daughter said, Mommy, no problem, let me just shoot the money to her. And in 1 minute, my daughter sent the money to my niece. And when she was finished, she said it was too much, and she sent back the change right away, Mr. President. Like, wow, you know? So I'm saying that we need to educate the general public as to what is going on with this bill, because people would say it is not affecting me. But transactions like those, and I can tell you because the young people in that 20 to maybe 30 age group, what they're doing a lot, there are a lot who are hairdressers, who are selling creams, who are selling makeup, who are selling drinks. Those young people have already moved to that platform of a cashless society. And I can tell you, having to deal with young people in that age group, what we want, Mr. President, is to spread it primarily to our senior population. And a lot of persons are saying, I must have my pension check in my hand, because if I don't have my pension check, you have not paid me my pension. Mr. President, I was having a discussion with someone in relation to how I was thinking that you could eliminate the long lines as well at the post offices, and with the postmen delivering pension checks physically to pensioners. I said to the individual, why don't you do a master list and have all the pensioners' names on the checks? And this was in the beginning when I first thought about it. Rather than the postmen now going out delivering house to house, like what we had to do when the country opened back, the list would have been at the post offices already. And my grandmother would only just have to then go to the post office, show her ID card. I know sometimes we talk about the fact about these 10 different forms of ID, which we will speak in the Barbados National ID Bill. Show the Barbados ID, and you can verify that that is the person and pay them their money on the spot. So you won't have to, so in fact, what I'm saying is that you're now eliminating the postmen from delivering checks to people. And I was told, my understanding is from a high-ranking official, by the end of the year, that will in fact stop. But as I said, the public education has to be rolled out, because unless you explain to seniors, and sometimes it is not always, sometimes it's the messenger that you use, Mr. President, to disseminate this message to my mother and my grandmother and so on. So when you explain to them, if you have a bank account, I heard the AG speaking yesterday in relation to the fact, which is a very good idea, I don't know if it will come out here today, that in relation to the chip that will be going into this new national ID card, that you can then load the pension onto the card. So in truth and in fact, they might not have a bank account, which they don't want, but the funds are now being loaded on to this national ID card that has a chip in it, and it will be a lot easier in terms, so they can walk with one card. It is their ID card, it is their driver's license, and in essence, it's their bank card. So I think, Mr. President, and that's why I support this bill wholeheartedly because we are therefore moving to a cashless society, and it would assist persons in many ways in terms of that. And certainly, Mr. President, it will eliminate those long lines around the bank. Now, when I was renewing my driver's license in January, I went online and I went through, I think it's Easy Pay, and I renewed my driver's license there on the spot. I got a call from the licensing authority. Some people will say, oh, you got a call because you're a senator, but that's not true. I was shocked. I got a call saying that we have received your payment, and they sent me a receipt saying if the police stop you, here's your receipt, even though they don't have the new cards as yet, the new stickers for your car, that you have your receipt as proof that you have paid. So, Mr. President, all these transactions are moving in that direction of cashless societies. And I would admit, and maybe you would have experienced, when I first, the senator spoke about Kenya. I didn't know about Kenya. When I first came back here, because you know when we operate in these other jurisdictions, we practically lived in a cashless society. All the vendors on the high street did not take any money. They all had technology in which you can pay. So I am very happy, and I would be very willing to assist any public education campaign explaining to persons that don't panic. Nobody's taking your money. In fact, what will happen is that your funds are going to be loaded onto these cards. You can use them if you want to go and buy 2 pounds of potatoes from the vendor down the road, because the vendor too will be having the technology in which you can transfer your payments at the same time. So, Mr. President, I am saying that yes, I support this bill, and with those few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Wiggins. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, when a bill like this comes before us, I think one of the best starting points is to ask ourselves the question, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And several of the contributions that have been made so far touch on, beg your pardon, elements of the problem we're trying to fix. But I'd like to offer another explanation, an analogy to start at that point. I want you to imagine, Mr. President, sir, that you have a car. I imagine you already do have a car, and you might have bought it to deliver yourself from point A to point B in comfort or at speed, or perhaps it's a vehicle you bought for a business, a utility vehicle, a van, and you invested in it specifically to develop your small business. But there's a problem, and the problem is that you're not allowed to drive that car on the road network. And you're not allowed to drive it on the road network because the roads are all owned privately by 5 companies. And if you want to access that network, you've got to pay. And you've got to pay quite significant fees and charges. Now, so I think we can agree that faced with that kind of situation, ordinary life becomes quite difficult to live, much less running a business. If you're running a business in that sort of environment, you really find yourself limited in terms of offering goods and services to clients, and most importantly, collecting payment to those who are within walking distance, unless you pay these private operators to use their network. And this is not the worst of it, sir. You can pay and still not use your car. You have to use a car that they allocate to you. So it might not be the fastest car. It might not even be the safest car for exactly what you want to do. But that's the only way you can get access. So I suggest that this analogy is really, it shares many parallels with the current state of our overall payment system infrastructure. And a payment system can be many things. Checks are a payment system. There's a lot of jargon around different types of electronic payment systems, ACH. In the UK, you've got BACS and CHAPS and SWIFT and all kinds of things. But what we really care about is not what's going on behind the scenes. What we want to be able to do with all these networks is simply send and receive money in the first instance, because that is perhaps the key. When Senator Cummins spoke about Kenya, that is perhaps the key, as it proved in Kenya, to stoking a fire under entrepreneurs and simply transferring money, traversing very vast geographical distances that the banks in Kenya had not found a solution for, because M-Pesa was a solution of a telecoms company. So we're really just talking about the free movement of your asset, your cash, to take care of things that you need to take care of. And sometimes those things will be personal, sometimes it'll be running a business. Now, when I say there's a parallel with our payment system, there's more than that. This ownership structure tends to underwrite the presence of a very large cash economy in Barbados. Now, we know how big that is, or we have an estimate thanks to the Inter-American Development Bank. It's about 30% of our recognized GDP. That's 1.5 billion US dollars. Now, that's a big number. That's a big opportunity. And we also know from the IADB that in this country, 17% of the population survive on less than 650 Barbados dollars a month. And that's the IADB definition of poverty. And there's a big overlap between those two groups. The current structure of our payments network effectively means that those groups, that cash economy, that's a form of financial tenantry, if you like. Like the tenantries that existed once in this country, where the roads weren't paved and utilities didn't reach inside. This bill is trying to change that state of affairs. It is about providing greater convenience to people who already have bank accounts, or who may have a bank account but, or a credit union account, and they have all the things that we take for granted in here as senators who probably earn, I think most of us, a fair wage. This is things like being able to pay electronically, taking out a loan, subscribing to a pension plan, some kind of savings device. Many people do not have ready access to those things that we take for granted. So this bill, as described when it was introduced, as overarching, captures not just the existing state of affairs, and that is the parallel I'm drawing when I compare a road network to a payment system, but also what it might look like, which is what Senator Nurse spoke to and wanted to hear a little bit more about. This is a starting point. This is not a silver bullet to solving all our problems. That very structure that we currently have, is very, very sticky, and I'll come on to what I mean by that in a moment. You have entrenched incumbents, and creating alternatives, driving competition is a long-term process. But that's the goal, the starting point that this bill wants to attack. It wants to create, by granting more access to the current payment systems and encouraging people to build new payment systems, whatever jargon or abbreviation you attach to them. All these things just facilitate the movement of money for personal or for business purposes. We don't care what they're called. That's what the average person wants. And this bill is a starting point for actually achieving that. How, in concrete terms, does it do that? Well, currently, just like that fictionalized road network, if you want to use the electronic payments network in Barbados, or indeed any network except for cash, you've got to go through the banks. The banks are the guardians. They grant or withhold access to the payments network. Now, this bill changes that by appointing the Central Bank of Barbados instead to that function. What that means is, in concrete terms, is the central bank now is the entity that is going to balance what does our economy need in terms of stability and consumer protection against what all these anticipated businesses who are going to ask for access can offer. Some will come with innovative solutions to the very problem that Senator Wiggins mentioned. How do you stop, or how do you offer an improvement in quality of life for pensioners who are queuing up twice a month to collect paper checks? Others will come with solutions that will change the state of our embryonic e-commerce structure. The central bank now, not a private consortium, are going to decide who is best placed to deliver that. I think history shows us that when you have tight control by an oligopoly of any sort of economic asset base, that it doesn't act in the best interest of the public. It acts in its own, and it's normal, its own private interest. This bill seeks to redress that balance, to make these networks better serve the public good. There's another aspect that has an immediate impact, and this is why I mentioned earlier the power of the incumbents and the stickiness of the incumbents. It may be, and I'm not saying it will happen, but it may be that the central bank grants access to a payment system or allows somebody to build a network, only to find that the existing banks refuse to either grant that business a bank account, which is a death sentence for doing business anyway, or they may say, you know what, although he meets the legal requirements for KYC, and which is know your customer, this is anti-money laundering measures and legislation, although this person meets the requirements, we, the banks, judge that it's still not good enough. We're not going to have anything to do with him. That's actually happened. This is not just a far-fetched idea. So the central bank under this legislation can also grant accounts at the central bank to people it grants access to the wider payments network with. Now, really, these are supposed to be settlement accounts to protect the public. So if some new actor goes bankrupt, the central bank is holding the money to cover everybody who trusted that actor with its cash. But there is flexibility that these could perhaps serve as operating accounts, should it be the case that any given entity finds it's very difficult in its ordinary course of business to deal with incumbent banks. These are very important and really quite powerful elements of the bill. Now, so I think there's a far broader question to return to the cash economy and the size of the cash economy. Many of the comments we've heard and observation really deal with cases where a business or an individual already has a bank account or a credit union account. Now, what about those people who are in that cash economy? They may have a credit union account that's dormant. I gather there are quite a lot of those. But their daily existence may be dominated, financial existence, through the use of cash. You know, how do you reach those people? That 1.5 billion cash market and that 70% of people living below the poverty line, that's a financial tenantry that we have to find a way to build roads and financial utility into. And this bill is seeking to lay the groundwork for that also. How is it going to happen? We know, although people may not all have a bank account, they all have a smartphone. Smartphone penetration is measured in this country. It's over 100%, which means on average people have more than one smartphone. So you may not have the ready means to access a bank account, or you may not want to use your credit union account. But we know, the government knows, and the central bank knows, that the elements are there in place to reach such segments of the population anyway. But how is it actually going to happen? And this is where the bill forms part of a larger process that the government is undertaking. If you're a commercial bank in this country, you have a very expensive cost base. You've got a lot of branches, you've got a lot of staff. You're not interested in banking people who earn more than that $650 a month, because chances are you don't consider them to be a profitable segment of the population. So ultimately, the solutions to solving that problem are not, in my view, going to come from commercial banks. What about credit unions? Well, potentially they could make some inroads, but credit unions offer services that are described, they're called nested. They're really resellers of services, financial services that are already offered by the banks. Now, you cannot compete on price with what you're reselling from someone else. So there's a limit to how much competition a credit union can offer. So there are really only two ways that you can deal with this. And one of them relates to the bill we're going to debate later, the Barbados Identity Management Bill, and the distribution of national identity cards. I'm sure that when Minister McCartney comes to speak about that, amongst all the functionality that that card will have, and Minister Strawn mentioned this in the other place yesterday, is the capacity to send and receive money. Now, one of the problems of payments generally is, if you're a private enterprise, is it only becomes profitable at scale. And this is also a challenge for granting access and trying to stoke up competition, especially when all the scale is already with commercial banks. But a national ID has scale built in because every single person will have it. And the government, in my view, has created the single best counterbalance to the inclination of banks and privately held payment networks to increase fees, the very fees that Senator Nurse spoke about, with this mechanism, this capacity of the digital ID to also be a payment network. It might be the way you pay for bus fare, it might be the way you receive social benefits. There are all kinds of different ways, but it's a critical counterbalance and a way of injecting competition into the existing market. And it is contemplated in this bill. That is the reason it is overarching by design. Now, there is a second way that this time the private sector can help, not only with existing bank account holders, because as Senator Nurse referred to, there is a lot of disquiet and periodic flare-ups and complaints about the level of fees that banks impose in this country. Largely that's driven by two factors, their cost base and also the fact that they're an oligopoly. There's not a lot of them around. So they can nearly always impose a fee or a fee rise. They can find the pain point, the point at which there'll be general rebellion and stop just before it. But were there to be a new private sector entrant whose entire business model is digital, so it does not have this expensive cost base, that would significantly change the marketplace. I'll speak a little bit more about that also. Now, the government has mentioned this from time to time. It's mentioned it in isolation as a standalone possibility, but it's also spoken about the potential for the Barbados Postal Service to increase the volume of financial services that it actually offers. It might do that alone, or it might do that in partnership with another private sector entity. Now, again, this is very important, but because to overcome that problem of scale requires capital from, if you're a private sector potential competitor. But you have to overcome another factor also, and that is what I called the stickiness earlier that banks enjoy. And I'm referring to the clients. There are two pieces of data from the UK, but they apply more widely to many countries. And the first is the average length of a marriage in the UK, 11.6 years. In comparison, the average length that a bank account is held in the UK, 17 years. So we're more faithful to our bank than to our spouses. Sir, it's hard for a bank to hold a horn, basically. And to overcome that is no simple thing. They're entrenched, and they're going to act in their best interest as they rightly should. So the measures I've spoken to thus far that contemplate ways that this bill envisage the facilitation of more competition, of more innovation, of reaching into parts of our population that don't enjoy things that many of us take for granted in terms of financial services. Those are things that the government can facilitate, it cannot guarantee. The thing the government is, I can assure you, very, very well aware of is the fee question. Now, this bill envisages, I'll call them sub-entities, like the National Payments Council, which is spoken about within the provisions of this bill, the Financial Tribunal, and so on. And the regulations are still to be fully associated with the bill. But it's critical, and the government recognizes its criticality, that those provisions are proactive and not reactive to what may happen in the marketplace. What do I mean by that? Well, specifically, if those provisions and that approach didn't exist by the government, I suspect things could look a lot different in 6 months than they do today. Concurrent to this bill, there are other developments going on in the payment space in Barbados. You may all have seen the advertisements in the press not that long ago, I think from the Barbados Bankers Association, talking about CARIFs. Now, CARIFs is a piece of financial infrastructure that was created in the 1990s, I think. And what it was really designed to do was to ensure that you, as a customer of Bank X, could take your automatic banking machine card, ABM card, I'm going to call it the CARIFs card from now, to the ATM of another bank, of which you weren't the customer, and withdraw cash. It was a way of ensuring compatibility amongst all the ATMs of all the banks to facilitate convenience of the client base. But we can also make purchases with that same CARIFs card, that same ABM card. Now, there are things that we know, and there are things we don't know in the developments that I'm referring to. We know, for example, how much the services offered by CARIFs cost. The card itself was free. There's no annual fee for that. If you withdrew cash from a machine that wasn't your bank's machine, you generally paid between $1.25 and $2 for that withdrawal. And if you made a purchase, a domestic purchase with your card, you and the merchant would pay a flat fee between 25 cents and $1.50. So these are rates that we all knew about. And we also know that 9 million transactions run through CARIFs, and 7 million of those are to do with purchases, and the balance is to do with the withdrawals from ATM cards. All of that is quantified. We know exactly what it adds up to. Now, what we don't know is some of the work the banks are currently carrying out on the ACH to make what is called the ACH is just a digital network to facilitate payments. We can forget the name, but they want to make it a real-time network. So the very feature that Senator Wiggins spoke about just now, where you send money and it comes instantly and you return the change, that just becomes an everyday fact of life. So they're making investments into that. What we don't know is that going to have a fee structure that will impact us. The banks have also been talking about creating a peer-to-peer network where I could just pay you, Mr. President, directly without going through an intermediary like a bank's account or server somewhere. Is that going to have a fee attached to it? And so on and so forth. You know, CARIFs itself is going to be largely decommissioned and partially repurposed for the benefit of some of the smaller credit unions. But it's going to go away. Now, I've done a calculation. I have a decent command of basic arithmetic, and I've looked at the rates such as they are published by the banks for their Visa and MasterCard charges, because those are the networks, also payment system, just called Visa and MasterCard, which all those 9 million transactions currently carried by CARIFs, the bulk of all of those are going to go through those networks from now on. So, under my calculations, if that happens, we are going to end up paying an additional, not a total, an additional fee load of between $20 and $27 million. And about $15 million of that will be on merchants. And merchants will simply find a way to pass that cost along. That's what would happen if this bill didn't envisage regulatory control that I'm sure is going to be proactive and make sure that we're not suddenly presented with a fait accompli of all these additional fees sitting on us. It's a critical, it's almost like a fail-safe. If there's a time lag between more competition coming in and injecting both innovation and a lower fee scale, this is a backstop to make sure it doesn't actually happen. I think, sir, that there's, on this fee question, there's an interesting dynamic that occurs to me. As banks, rightly profit-seeking, wish to increase the fees, if it's allowed to happen, we're going to end up incentivizing cash. People will find ways not to pay these fees. It's normal. Merchants will encourage you to pay cash. and it completely sabotages both what the banks would like to achieve, because handling cash is very expensive, and the number one industry that handles cash is the financial sector, namely banks. It's security that Senator Wiggins spoke about, the distribution of it, the cost in terms of to businesses of reconciling the accounts every night if you're a supermarket, for example, and frankly the sacrifice of entrepreneurial spirit, because they have to be dominated by cash, is very heavy. Banks don't want that, and neither does the rest of the country. So it's really critical that we find a way to ensure all the incentives are aligned, that we don't have runaway fees, that we are able to encourage new entrants into this market, and that the appropriate regulatory framework sits right behind it to make sure to catch almost anything, to act as a long stop. Anything that we haven't foreseen comes to light. I think this is, in many ways, a revolutionary bill because it is full of jargon and it relates to technology. It's not always obvious, but it's a bill that addresses quality of life issues primarily, I think, and also creates a catalyst to economic growth. If we can tap into that 1.5 billion cash economy that currently sits and is not scored on our books, if we can do that in these depressed times, these pandemically depressed times, we need it. Yeah, it'll be a great thing. So I commend this bill. I fully support it, and I'm obliged to, sir.
Thank you, Senator Adams. Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon to members of this honorable chamber. Sir, the bill which is currently up for debate is poised under the heading with the purpose and the intention to modernize the national payment system and to provide regulation for the same entity. And I find myself enthused to follow Senator Adams, who perhaps at a previous time in a different iteration may not have been as enthusiastic with the concept of regulation as he currently finds himself. But that's just a small jab to my colleague who sits on the government side. The intent of the legislation, Mr. President, certainly is one which, without hesitation, members of this House should find themselves in support of. The current system of automatic clearinghouse is one which those of us who venture within the field of apps or transfers or money transfers have gotten accustomed to somewhat grudgingly, and the uptake has certainly been expedited by the times in which we find ourselves. Sir, currently, through my banking provider, and I won't say the name, I utilize a lovely app for my transfers. And I utilize these transfers to pay persons with whom I do business and persons with whom I may have to settle an obligation. Currently, sir, the wait time for certain transfers occurs within a day, some even quicker, and those which are new take sometimes longer. And that process, you will see if you venture onto these mobile devices, sir, is done through the ACH. And there's a little bill which comes along when you do your ACH transfer of $1 for every transfer that is done, similar to the bill which was referenced by Senator Adams with regard to the previous iteration of CARIS. But what this bill provides, sir, is hope. And it's one of those scenarios so where we are doing something which, if it were done earlier, would have provided an avenue for the situation where we currently find ourselves. However, it's better late than never, Mr. President, and some would say that we're ahead of the curve depending on how you position yourself on the different lines. But one of the major aspects of the current lockdown is that transactions involving the banking community and the legal community have effectively been halted. In other words, persons are unable to close transactions which require transfer of funds and execution of documents. This bill provides, and I was very enthusiastic, and I do not do legal transfers, my firm does, And I listened to my other partners in that regard, sir, and I'm sure the deputy president and Senator Sands will have something to say as well about it, sir. The issue means that now with electronic imaging, checks can be transferred electronically and matters can be closed without having the physical interaction. So certainly that is something which hopefully once in place will allow certain types of transactions to move forward. Also, the concept and the complaint at the previous scenarios we had where we were impacted was that persons were wondering how they would be able to access check funds for deposit and check funds in terms of accessing payments made via check. This legislation seems to lead the framework, sir, for that to be done. So certainly, if this legislation were in place earlier, there could be some actions which would have been able to be moving forward during this period, sir. So it certainly is a bill that hopefully will lend support to those in need of these mechanisms to keep the engines of commerce moving, sir. Now, sir, I threw a sprat for Senator Adams, but he didn't take it, so I'll say it again. Previously, the issue of regulation within the market was viewed by those in the market with a certain amount of skepticism or over-regulation. Now, I believe that by encouraging the central bank within the foray of the clearing houses, certainly we can have a situation where the playing field is kept somewhat level. What is interesting, sir, is now that we have the banks, we now have the credit unions, and we have the third-party electronic money transfer agents. I believe is a license you have to apply for, sir. And what is interesting within this clearinghouse rules is the provision of the central bank to graft the necessary legislation or rules to govern the interaction between the parties. That certainly, sir, should lead to some interesting times. These regulations, sir, are provided for at Section 62, and of note is Section 47, which binds liquidators, which is something which those who are lending money for these entities to indulge in this business will certainly be mindful of. And of course, sir, when we're setting the rules within this new regime, care and concern has to be, of course, made to the correspondent banking regulations and agreements which these banks now have. Certainly, it is something which we look forward to with enthusiasm to encourage players within the market. The question is how heavy a hand is put within regulation, or is it one where a light touch might sometimes reap better rewards? But time will tell, sir. I did not hear Senator Adams speak on the issue of crypto, and I must confess I have a family member who is very enthused by these transactions, sir. The issue of crypto, I believe, sir, falls within the definition of electronic money. I'm not certain. I'm sure it will be tested. But I believe the major issue relating to these cryptocurrencies, besides pump and dump concerns, of course, relates to the repatriation of funds for gains made in these transactions. In other words, Mr. President, if you go to your bank presently and say, I would like to transfer $30,000 from a source X, and they say, well, okay, what is the source of source X? And you say, well, I made some gains in Bitcoin, it is likely that the bank would tremble and say, well, we can't source where that money came from and issues with regard to correspondent banking. And there is a certain amount of hesitancy with regard to receipt of those funds. The question, of course, of whether there are any capital gains, taxation is out of my depth, but I believe hopefully that this legislation lends the framework for a more, if not enthusiastic, open-minded approach to the utilization of these electronic money and electronic fund transfers, and opens the window a bit to the concept of, while not necessarily making it mainstay, but a bit more willing of the relevant parties to consider utilization within the local framework. Now, sir, it also lends itself to support, and I've heard the comments about money transfers and access to the unbanked, and we all know the popularity of WhatsApp. Some will say it's a blessing, some will say it's a curse. And in territories such as India, persons actually utilize WhatsApp to transfer funds by utilizing an interaction with the bank. Maybe this could be done here, maybe it can't. But the point and the irony of what we're doing here, sir, is brought home by the fact that this is a fantastic piece of legislation which is preached on the basis of modernization and improvement of the interaction and the utilization of technology, yet I have to make these points to you physically, Mr. President. And while I do like being here with my fellow senators, and I do like being able to interact while being socially distant, Mr. President, I believe that it is time that we adopt the necessary technology ourselves. We have the technology, Mr. President, to allow us to make these contributions. To make these contributions from wherever, and I know that the standing orders, I think we're going to do them eventually, and I know it's been hinted at, but we have been discussing this for some time now. And I was there, and I'm hearing some aside so they could raise it properly, but I was there, sir. I was dealing with another matter, sir, and that is now why I'm here now. Because you see, sir, I like the cut and thrust. That is me. That is me, sir. I like it. So if they want to say it, sir, let them stand and say it. But the point is this, Mr. President. We certainly have a situation where we enjoy each other, and we certainly are here, and we speak of modernization, and we speak of leading the way. So let us do it fully. Let us set the example. Let us move forward with the legislation, and let's get things moving. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Any further contributions? Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to express my appreciation to the colleagues who spoke in support of the bill. Senator Nurse, who is a financial professional himself, spoke in great detail about why this was an important piece of legislation, and I want to acknowledge that support. Senator Wiggins, I appreciate, of course, the comments which you made about the internationalization of much of what is contained within this bill and how it is important, and of course your offer of support for communications is well noted. I think one of the key things that was mentioned in the other place when the bill was presented was that there has to then be, post the passage of the bill, an extensive process of engagement, further consultation, and of course public communication and education, and that was very much appreciated as your comment. Now, I don't think that I could even begin to dream of replicating the comments made by Senator Adams, who in himself is a world-class financial expert, and so he went into a very erudite explanation of not just the bill itself, but the framework within which it is being presented. I think the most important point that I would want to capture that he raised is obviously the importance of regulatory reform and the timing of the implementation of those regulations, which are meant to be appended to this body of legislation, and not wanting to have what he described as a fait accompli afterwards, playing catch up with regard to merchant fees. And I would wish to thank him for that. Those comments, and also to cite the commitment of the government to ensure that there is that kind of policy coherence and a timing of that policy coherence. Senator, my colleague senator who enjoys the cut and thrust across the room, Senator Boyce, he also, with a very strong legal background, spoke about the importance of financial transactions, and those comments were also well appreciated. I was also making the point that Senator Boyce arrived late and therefore was not in a position to benefit from the first part of the Senate discussion, which spoke in great detail. Mr. President, you shared in great detail the proposals and the way forward as it relates to virtual meetings. And it was clear from Senator Boyce's presentation that not only was he late, but he did not listen to the Senate by way of the radio or any of the other media which are available to him prior to his arrival, so he could be kept abreast of what was being discussed here in this honorable place. And so, Mr. President, I think this is one of those occasions where we are very clear on where we need to go as we move forward. We're very clear that this is a piece of transformational legislation, but that there are additional items which still need to be undertaken, and they will take the place of the regulations which are meant to be developed and or appended to this document. And with these few words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate dissolves itself into a committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate dissolve itself in the committee for consideration of this bill. Those Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 do stand par.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 7.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 through 7 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 to 7 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 8 through 17.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 8 through 17 do stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 8 through 17 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 18 through 27.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 18 through to clause 27 do stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 18 through 27 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 28 through 31.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clause 28 through 31 do stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 28 through 31 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 32 through 35.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 32 through 35 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 32 through 35 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 36 through 38.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 36 through 38 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 36 through 38 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 39 through 43.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 39 through 43 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 39 through 43 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those
Aye.
against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 44 through 49.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 44 through 49 stand part.
The question is that Part 9 through clauses 44 through 49 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 50 and 51.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 10, containing such clauses 50 and 51 stand part.
The question is that Part 10, clauses 50 and 51 stand part. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 52 and 53.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 11, clauses 52 through and 53 stand part.
The question is that Part 11, clauses 52 and 53 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 54 through 57.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 12, clauses 54 through 57 stand part.
The question is that Part 12, clauses 54 through 57 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 58 through 63.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 58 through 63 do stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 58 through 63 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The schedule.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of one bill so cited as the National Payment System Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be so cited. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill is so passed and so cited.
Order number 6, sir.
Order number 6.
In the name of Senator the Honourable L. Cummings, to move the second reading of the Bills of Exchange Amendment Bill 2020.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and
Second time.
I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the Bills of Exchange Bill 2021 Amendment 2021 do be read a second time. Those are members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate dissolves itself into committee for the consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Bills of Exchange Act, Cap 304, 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Bills of Exchange Amendment Act 2021. The question, those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now suspend for lunch and return at 2:15 p.m.
Before I move the question, just want to update announcements and to make an apology as well for the absence of Senator Dr. Holder and Senator Dr. Rogers. The question is that this sitting be suspended until 2:15 p.m. today. Those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly suspended until 2:15 today.